Today we're going to talk about background checks when you try to buy a firearm in the state of Florida. What happens exactly if the government tells you that you have failed a background check and thus cannot exercise your fundamental right to keep and bear arms? Is that the end of the story? Shouldn't someone in the government have to tell you why and help you get to the bottom of why you've been denied? Well, it turns out that the Florida Department of Law Enforcement actually at one point said no, it's not their problem. But good news, a panel of 3 judges in the 1st District Court of Appeals in Florida just handed down a big win for the Second Amendment that calls out the arbitrary and capricious nature of failed background checks in Florida. That's what we're going to talk about in just a second, and why, in my view, this is a huge win for Florida gun owners. Hey folks, I'm Mark, and welcome to the Four Boxes Diner. In order to buy a firearm from a federal firearms licensee, or FFL, which of course, as you know, is basically just a dealer authorized to buy and sell guns for profit by the federal government, you have to, of course, pass a background check and fill out what's known as a federal form 4473. Now, this background check, as you probably know, is done through the NICS system, or the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, okay? And the NICS system has, at least in theory, it has all the criminal records and records of certain legal disabilities that Americans might have that would prevent them from possessing firearms under 18 U.S.C. 922. For example, maybe there's records that indicate illegal drug use or mental incapacities or whatever it is. And this information is in this database from all the 50 states, and also from federal agencies like the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or the FBI. Now, down in Florida, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement is the agency or the department that's responsible for running these types of background checks when someone goes to buy a gun or get a gun from a FFL. Now, what happens, of course, most of you know this, is that you try to buy a gun, you fill out the 4473 form, and the FFL will run a check on your background through the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. Now, the results from this background check could be instantaneous, or potentially it could take up to 3 days. But when there's a background check, what happens if that background check on you comes back that you're not allowed to have a gun? It comes back declined. What happens next? I want to talk for a few minutes about a lawsuit and a court decision that really does talk about the role of the NICS system down in Florida. Mr. Leonardo Lynch sued the Florida Department of Law Enforcement when he was denied the right to purchase a firearm because he allegedly failed the NICS background check. Now, Mr. Lynch is apparently an active duty United States naval sailor. We appreciate his service, stationed in the state of Florida. Now, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement apparently denied Lynch his right to purchase a firearm based solely on an unproven NICS red flag, if you will, that was placed on his record by the state of, ready for this folks, New York. The anti-gun state of New York put this red flag, or flag, if you will, in the NICS system, and this got triggered when the background check was run by an FFL on Mr. Lynch. Now, because the background check in Florida is instantaneous, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement was hands-off or as they put it, they said their obligation to Mr. Lynch ended when they provided him the information from the state of New York. Specifically, hey, here's why you were denied. It's from the state of New York. You go handle this, not our problem. It's up to you, Mr. Lynch, to resolve this and get it fixed and come back to us and try to get your gun at that point. Okay? That's basically what Florida said to him. You see, Florida told Mr. Lynch that it was up again to him to find that New York record and get it fixed, right? Pick up the phone, call lawyers, whatever it takes, deal with New York, and then come back and try again. Okay? Until then, at least according to the state of Florida, he had no Second Amendment rights for Mr. Lynch. He was not entitled to get the gun. So what did Mr. Lynch do? Well, he did the only thing presumably he could really do, and that was bring a lawsuit. Here's the problem with Florida's position from the perspective of a Second Amendment advocate. You see, some anti-Second Amendment states, like New York, like California, I presume, are more than happy, my guess, are more than happy to submit voluminous records to databases like the NICS system in order to disqualify as many citizens as possible from owning firearms, right? I mean, it's no shock that states like New York and California don't like gun owners. They don't really like guns. So I would not be shocked if they make extra efforts to make sure that anything that would disqualify or even potentially disqualify someone would be dumped into these databases that make up the NICS background system, okay? Now further, bear in mind, for anyone that's ever tried to get anything done with most state governments, it's extremely hard, it's time consuming, and sometimes it's like hitting your head against the wall. And that was even before COVID. And now that we have COVID, you find, at least in my experience in the last couple of years, is state governments are even less responsive to American citizens to provide various services, because now a lot of them have the excuse that we're not going to work or we can't get the job done because of COVID. Okay. Now, as a result of that, it is very difficult to remove or correct these NICS records in many respects, okay? Especially if you have to deal with states like New York. So what exactly do you do, or does someone do, if they feel they've been flagged incorrectly by the NICS system, which is what happened with Mr. Lynch? Well, according to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and the Florida Attorney General, at least in Mr. Lynch's lawsuit, it's up to you, I repeat, it's up to you, the citizen, to try to fix it yourself, right? They will tell you who has the records that caused you to be denied your Second Amendment rights, but you're on your own when it comes to, again, getting these records physically, obtaining these records, understanding these records, and then going out there and trying to convince the governing power that submitted the records to the NICS system that there's somehow a mistake or error in it, and that it needs to be corrected, okay? But let me give you some great news. The good news is that the Florida District Court of Appeals actually ruled in favor of Mr. Lynch, and they rejected the position taken by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in this case. Okay? And I think the court made the right decision. Specifically, what the court said was that the state of Florida is not allowed to, they cannot deprive an American citizen, any person, of the immediate exercise of their constitutional rights without actual evidence justifying the refusal or denial. Okay? And this is really important, what I'm about to say. You see, the Florida court said that the burden of proof is not on the individual to show he's entitled to his Second Amendment rights, but that the burden of proof actually is on the government to show that you're not entitled to your Second Amendment rights, which is where the burden should be, right? So the Florida court said the burden of proof is on the government, not on Mr. Lynch or on any other person trying to buy a gun in Florida, to show actual evidence demonstrating that a person is disqualified from owning, possessing, or being able to acquire a firearm. Let's talk specifically about Mr. Lynch's lawsuit and the court decision. By the way, I'm going to put a link to this court decision down below in the description of this video so you can check it out yourself and see if I'm telling you the truth and see if you agree with how I analyze this case, okay? But again, with respect to Mr. Lynch's specific lawsuit, what happened there was the court indicated that the state of Florida had failed to prove that Mr. Lynch was disqualified from owning firearms because the state only relied on, it only referenced, again, it relied on only a single document, a piece of paper inserted into the NICS background system, right, into the NICS system by the state of New York. The Florida court said that the state of Florida, in denying Mr. Lynch the ability to get the firearm, screwed up by placing the responsibility on the shoulders of Mr. Lynch himself to retrieve these records from New York, okay, and to try to get the state of New York, the government of New York, to fix its records and then fix the NICS system, which of course, as a practical matter, I'm guessing would just not happen at all. And if you could possibly do it, it would only happen if you spent a lot of time and money, hired lawyers, you know, possibly sued the state of New York. Who knows what it would take to get the state of New York to actually allow someone to exercise their Second Amendment rights in another state and try to fix their records accordingly. I imagine it would be a tremendous burden to put on someone like Mr. Lynch, who was just trying to exercise his fundamental Second Amendment rights. And thank God the court in Florida said, no, no, no. This is fundamental Second Amendment rights. Mr. Lynch has that right, and it's up to the state of Florida to prove he's not entitled to that firearm. Let me tell you the exact language that the Florida Appeals Court used in ruling for Mr. Lynch. The court wrote, quote, "As a result, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement cannot make the determination that a person's constitutional right to purchase a firearm has been stripped away solely on hearsay evidence or hearsay document such as a NICS printout. Rather, when a potential buyer appeals a non-approval based on a NICS result, it is incumbent upon the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to request the underlying records to help determine whether the potential buyer is the same person as the subject of the record." That's what the Florida Court of Appeals said in ruling for Mr. Lynch and his Second Amendment rights. In my view, the decision in the Lynch case, again, which I put a link down below in the description of this video, is really important for Florida gun owners and for the Second Amendment for at least two reasons. First, it puts a wrench in the anti-gunners' administrative lethargy, okay, maybe strategy, that they sometimes will use to bureaucratically erode your ability to exercise your Second Amendment rights. Now, the burden is on them, the government, to prove the accuracy of the information that they rely on when conducting background checks and denying you your right to have a firearm if it comes back declined or denied, okay? Furthermore, before the Court of Appeals decision, keep in mind the time and the cost, the money and the headaches associated with fixing a problem like Mr. Lynch's would rest on the shoulders of ordinary Americans like Mr. Lynch, which frankly is a real pain in the butt to accomplish and super expensive in most cases, in my view, to boot, right? Now, does anyone doubt that asking ordinary working Americans to spend time reaching out to another state's governmental bureaucracy in order to try to get them to fix an administrative error would be a total headache? We know it would be extremely difficult, and good luck even getting the state to respond, never mind actually make a change in your favor as a gun owner in a place like Florida. Now, in my view, there is no doubt that requiring citizens to fix such a bureaucratic error would deter many Americans who lack the time and resources to wade through all the paperwork and have it corrected. Most people wouldn't even know where to turn to even start the process, never mind be able to successfully accomplish it. And again, keep in mind that this effort would likely require the use of an attorney, who might even cost more money than the gun you were trying to buy, right? Think about how terrible that is. Okay? And what a great deterrent if you're an anti-gunner to discourage people from buying firearms if you force them to hire a lawyer and spend more money on the lawyer than the gun they're trying to buy. That's crazy, right? But that is, of course, what many anti-gunners really would like the law to be if they could make it so. The second point I want to make is the court decision called the NICS document as hearsay, okay? Which means that the Florida Department of Law Enforcement running these NICS checks needs more than just a non-approval slip of paper for evidence, okay? A paper report is not enough. They have to actually get the fundamental records themselves and verify that. For example, the NICS applicant is the same person as the one who's been flagged as being unable or ineligible to own a firearm. Here's my best guess. This ruling by the Florida Court of Appeals is going to make agencies like the Florida Department of Law Enforcement much less likely to arbitrarily or erroneously disqualify lawful citizens from being able to take possession of firearms from an FFL, which apparently is what happened to Mr. Lynch. So let's wrap up. We know that anti-gunners are always looking for any excuse to restrict our fundamental right to keep and bear arms. Any roadblock that they can throw up, legitimate or otherwise, they're going to try to do. So to me, it's really exciting news when anyone in America succeeds in pushing back against needless restrictions or otherwise fights and successfully wins in favor of the Second Amendment and their right to keep and bear arms. So to me, what happened in Florida in this Lynch case is a major victory for law-abiding Americans, especially those living in Florida. Okay, so I hope you learned something here today, and thanks for tuning into the Four Boxes Diner, where we serve hot, fresh Second Amendment news and analysis. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe and spread the word. So we'll see you next time here at the Four Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.